I mean, we saw what happened when there was more interconnectivity with communications over the internet. What the internet did for communications, I think Bitcoin and Lightning can do for monetary financial services. So
I'm excited to introduce our guest, Mr. Charlie Spears. He's been on with us before. He is a friendly Bitcoin miner. He also runs all of our Tulsa Bitcoin meetups, and super excited that he does that because he does a great job of it. Without further ado, man, let's bring on the Ordinal King here. Mr.
Hey guys.
Spears. Come on, sir. How are you doing today?
Good morning. I'm great. I've been sleeping well, even though I've been working around the clock. I think I've been using the term Ordfluencer lately as the colloquial term.
Ordfluencer.
Okay, months ago I didn't imagine that.
I want to jump right into this, and I want to ask just a couple of questions to set a foundation for this conversation. So give us, first of all, the rundown on what are ordinals, what is ordinal theory, I guess, and what is the most basic explanation of what its use is.
So the best explanation is going to come from the guy who invented it himself, Casey Rodarmor. What ordinal theory is, it's a way of tracking individual Satoshis or numbering individual sats on the Bitcoin blockchain. Casey describes it kind of as a collective hallucination. Really, it's just a shared scheme to track and number Satoshis on the Bitcoin blockchain. What does that look like? So when a block is mined, you kind of like look at the 6.25 Bitcoin that are created, and the first Satoshi kind of in a line in that block is going to be the first sat of that block. And the Genesis block, if you will, the first block that Satoshi mined himself, starts with sat 1. And then the second sat in that Genesis block is sat 2. And then if we go all the way through all the Satoshis which will ever be created, there will be like 22 point something quadrillion sats over the next 100 something odd years. And so this is not native to the Bitcoin protocol. This is not in the code anywhere. This is just a way of an added layer of interpreting what already exists on the Bitcoin code base. So it's really interesting. So like Casey describes it as like it's a hallucination. We're all going to start adopting this way of numbering and tracking the sats. And what that allows is a way to then start tracking like specific data or attributions to those Satoshis themselves. So when you send a Bitcoin transaction, there is a modest amount of data that you can associate with that called the witness data. And a finite amount of that data can fit into a Bitcoin block. And what inscriptions are is a way of including information into the data, into the witness data, that we then tie to and track using ordinal theory to specific Satoshis. That is, I think I'm going to get better at explaining it over the years, and it's the kind of thing where you kind of you got to hear it a few times. I really just kind of stumbled onto this because I've talked about this on this podcast before, Nick. Like I like kind of outsider views of Bitcoin. I like stuff that's like outside the norm, stuff that like I've not heard before. And I heard this and I was like, oh, this is a really interesting idea. So I, was hopping in and chatting with Casey and the really just like junior developer who he's got just a little while ago, honestly. And through that kind of proximity, I found myself helping the unofficial Ordinals team scale what was originally a 2 or 3 person like side project into now it's like a 20,000 person Discord, and it's every single media outlet is trying to talk about this, and there's really no business plan, no coherent strategy. It's just run and gun, build stuff and get excited. And I'll try to pause there so you can kind of ask a follow-up question.
Yeah, that's really good. That's from the video that you'd sent me. That's like spot on, exactly what he was talking about. I guess one follow-up thought on that would be, it seems like people for all of human history have been creating ways to objectively view and compartmentalize and label what is just objective, right? There are two trees, or this tree is this color, or this Satoshi is my Satoshi and not your Satoshi. Why would somebody, why is this such a monumental thing for Bitcoin? Why is it so, why is it a nuanced thing? Why does it feel like such a nuanced thing to be able to track individual Satoshis?
There is a number of ways I can answer that. I'll probably add a follow-up analogy. So Bitcoin is like the roads exist, they're built, and ordinal theory is kind of like drawing lines on the roads and saying, this is just how we're going to interpret and use the roads. And if everybody kind of works together to do it, then, we can use the roads in a certain way. And that's kind of what that's one of the kind of mechanisms that underpins this. It can be controversial for a number of reasons. Some of my opinions on why it is are quite critical of some attitudes within Bitcoin. I try to remain like more of a positivist. I get excited about the new things and bringing new people into the ecosystem, and then some of the really nuanced details of why this can be good, bad, or anything in between I'll leave up to some of the experts. But I've gotten a little bit better at wrapping my head around it. When this kicked off, so on January 20th, Casey shipped it's a client called the Ord client. So you run a Bitcoin node and you run the Ord client, which runs in tandem on top of that. And it just takes the Bitcoin core client, which sends transactions, and it adds an interpretation to how those transactions are sent. And he shipped that to mainnet on the 20th of January. And by February 3rd, Jimmy Song and Pierre Richard were losing their minds about it totally breaking and collapsing the entire Bitcoin network. And I think that the answer, I think that I don't think it's super straightforward whether what the long-term effect is going to be. And it has huge effects from a miner standpoint. This is actually kind of one of the reasons I was looking at it, is because one of the big conversations right now, and has been one of the big criticisms of Bitcoin, is that Bitcoin's block subsidy, which gets halved every year or every 4 years, goes down. And so the question is that going to be enough to sustain the Bitcoin network and the mining network? Because otherwise, because ultimately we all understand that the network, and it's intuited by Bitcoiners, that the network has to sustain itself off of each block, the transaction fees in each block. Where are the transaction fees? Where is the demand for this block space going to come from? And I'm interested in things that create new ways and new demand for block space. What these inscriptions do is add a new element of pricing block space. It is going to make it more expensive to use Bitcoin, and that has always been the plan. Now we can argue over how should it make the block space more expensive, more valuable, and we can argue over the specific pricing scheme and the incentives that are created from it. So I don't know if I actually answered your question, but this touches on where the nuance of where if this is good, bad, or how this goes. That's where the nuance lies.
That's so interesting.
Love it. Griff,
do you view Bitcoin as money? I mean, is that your view on Bitcoin? Do you view its base layer? Obviously there are properties of money. So it's not like Bitcoin just gets to decide what money is, but do you feel like it's money more than anything else? Or do you feel like it's more of a public record more than anything else?
I may have mentioned this on the podcast earlier. I have always thought it is money. Is its only purpose money? What is the real big picture of Bitcoin? I've always maintained that that the current consensus and understanding of Bitcoin is insufficient, and that the picture of what Bitcoin is much broader, and that it's probably, if I can imagine, it's probably more a new consensus paradigm for a lot of things. Money is like clearly one of the bootstrap mechanisms for that, because money is itself a communication layer. So we had this argument. So one thing is like Ordinal Theory, the tracking of Satoshis is not new. Casey, kind of like Satoshi themselves, didn't really invent a whole lot of core new concepts. They really combined a lot of things which already existed in a novel way, and were able to kind of ship that to the world. And so in 2012 and I believe 2014, we saw things which are analogous to Ordinal Theory, or tracking and identifying sats on the chain. We saw those already kind of be concepted and floated, and they never really took off. What Casey really did was clearly define these, then build out tooling both on the client side, which interprets this, and on the kind of like user-facing side to be able to display the actual content that we can inscribe on chain. That's what's novel, is he kind of like provided the tooling to be like, okay, here's the idea, go use it. And so one of the reasons why it's become so like wildfire in the center of all the conversations, because all the NFT folks immediately for the past 2 years, NFT people have been degenerate on other chains, really confused, a lot of frivolity on these other chains. They're like, oh shit, Bitcoin, this is cool. And they immediately came in and started putting JPEGs on Bitcoin. And so, I think we can criticize like the worth of those things, but like they were able to immediately do that. It requires some command line familiarity and, kind of learning some archaic, some like somewhat inaccessible like techniques, but like they were able to already just be like, oh look, there's that NFT thing that I put on chain, and here we are going, well, it's not really an NFT, it's an inscription which actually has fundamentally different properties. And this is kind of what Bitcoiners have been saying for a long time. This blows my mind that we kind of like, now that it's happening to Bitcoin, we were like terrified. Is that like we've always said that these things which happen on other blockchains will coalesce onto Bitcoin long term. This is the early version of what that might look like. Is it going to be inscribing JPEGs on the Bitcoin blockchain? I don't know. But really what it is, JPEGs and images are really one form of data, and this really allows you to put data on the Bitcoin blockchain. The conversation over whether Bitcoin should be a data layer or a monetary layer is very old. It's a decade-old kind of argument. And I don't really lie on one clear side of the fence here. My view is that we had the block size war so we could define a pretty clear limit to data, or a ceiling onto the data, that the amount of data that the Bitcoin blockchain should contain. And this is the natural evolution of discovering and utilizing what data layer the Bitcoin network can facilitate. It's not going to break nodes for a long time. Right now, it's the Bitcoin blockchain, full node is like 500 gigabytes. If we were to fill every single block 4 megabytes starting today for the next 10 years, my existing software on the node I run behind me could run it until 2028. So it's quite cheap. It's quite trivial. It's really not going to break a whole lot for the average pleb for some time. What could, and there's some data and some analysis which will emerge on this over time, and we'll really be able to flesh this out. What does this do to the pricing of financial transactions versus what we would call data transactions? That's a good productive argument and conversation to have. The more I learn about it, the more I used to be pretty agnostic about it. The more I learn about it, the more I think it's probably actually pretty close to fine how it's currently priced. But I have learned.
How does that happen, Charlie? How do you actually sell the the picture for more than one sat? Because obviously it's going to get inscribed as one. How do you actually get the money?
So this gets into what are called Bitcoin unspent transaction outputs, which is the actual way that Bitcoin is sent from account to account. Because you don't actually say, I'm going to send a whole Bitcoin from Charlie to Griff. It's actually really like a ledger entry of like Charlie sent Griff, X Bitcoin and got X change back. It's like an unspent transaction output is like, I owe you 25 cents, but I've only got $1, so I'm going to pay you $1, and you're going to give me 75 cents back. That's kind of like the big picture. UTXOs, or unspent transaction outputs, are a little bit arcane, which Bitcoiners not really had to understand, but now we'll have to understand. So what happens is the actual transmission of the SAT is tracked in the UTXO. So like the first SAT of the UTXO is like the SAT that we track. And then if the person on the other end also tracks it, they'll be like, yeah, I got that inscription. You don't have to even play by the rules to like receive an inscription. It's just that if someone else like indexes all the UTXOs which have ever happened, they can be like, oh, here's where all the inscriptions lie.
Okay.
Right now, there's not a super easy, trustless way to exchange them, which is just indicative of how early this is. It's been 20 days since this release. So, I mean,
so interesting.
Yeah.
Well, it's
So, Charlie,
I'm sorry, Nick.
Oh, I was going to say, Charlie, with the inscriptions on an individual Satoshi, how are you able to, and this is just something that may just be simple, I just don't understand. How are you able to go into, say, your wallet or wherever you're storing the coin that you're doing what you're playing around with? You're able to select that individual Satoshi and say, I want that included in this amount of Bitcoin that I'm sending to this person. So you're able to isolate and send and receive individual Satoshis. Is that correct?
That's correct. And this happens not on the Bitcoin Core client side or not on a normal Bitcoin wallet, but rather on the Ord wallet, which just says we're going to draw those lines on the road and we're going to make sure that, this SAT that we've identified has this is tracked and sent the right way. Technically, you can do this with any Bitcoin wallet. It's just that because those Bitcoin wallets don't track those Satoshis, you don't actually have control. It's kind of like you could send it, but you might actually accidentally send it, and that SAT might be given to the miner's fee. So Bitcoin already does this. It's just interpreting it on a little bit higher level.
Okay,
but
I would say
it's like these SATs are we're probably getting into the fungibility, but it's like you get $1 for your first dollar for a new business, and you right, this is our first dollar on that dollar, and you hang it up on the wall, and you could technically go spend that dollar at any business. They probably don't care. You care about that dollar, and you might forever hold that dollar, or you might if it's a famous business like Amazon's first dollar, that might be worth more, but technically that dollar is still fungible, and there are people who will attribute that dollar as only being valuable as a dollar. So it doesn't affect the fungibility technically. It kind of affects the social consensus of what is a fungible SAT.
Well, does money
that's
have
a big distinction? Yeah.
Does Bitcoin have to be fungible for it to work, though? I mean, that's another serious question, because in the future, right, all these ordinals and inscriptions are doing, or you're basically saying, hey, for one Satoshi, which is nothing, for one Satoshi, you could put the Constitution of the United States on a public ledger. You could put any type of information on there, and does it mess up fungibility? Yeah, sure. But can we still communicate the value with Bitcoin without everybody understanding one Bitcoin is definitely still mostly one Bitcoin. There's just these ordinals out there that have these important pieces of information on them. I don't know.
That's a really good question. This is probably Nick, you really phrased, Griff, you really phrased one of the most interesting questions that I think we're going to have to like, this is probably going to make me think a lot. Like, does Bitcoin have to be fungible? I would say, I would make this statement. I have a hard time ever imagining Bitcoin fulfilling its purpose if it is not fungible on a technical layer. Like, if one sat does not equal one sat, from a technical standpoint, I have a hard time imagining Bitcoin would be truly like what Satoshi imagines.
Yeah.
I think we will probably. What happens about what happens is like the social consensus. I'll also say this: there is a finite amount of Satoshis that you can inscribe, and we can pretty much mathematically define this. And it's like less than 0.1% of all sats, assuming the existing schema for ordinal theory and inscriptions is the like one that will dominate for the next century. Let's just pretend this, and let's just assume we start inscribing everything as much can be physically inscribed into Bitcoin by limit of the current block size. I believe the upper limit to what a Satoshi, like how many Satoshis can be special, is something like 0.1% of the entire Bitcoin network. So like, even if the argument is that it challenges Bitcoin's fungibility, the vast majority of Bitcoin technically cannot ever be unfungible, or whatever the opposite of fungible is. So I'm a bit of a purist, so I think it should be kind of all or nothing. So it should technically all be fungible. But Griff, that is a really good question, and I'm probably going to be thinking about what the best way to answer that is for a while.
Well, I just think that it's really interesting because Bitcoin does change economically. It changes the definition of a lot of things. Like if we're really all going to use this Bitcoin network, digital security should cost nothing in regards to like how that economy should run. I mean, if there's a whole bunch of friction in regards to like, if we have friction in regards to digital property rights, that would be the most counterintuitive thing to Bitcoin ever. Bitcoin is basically supposed to make property rights seamless. So it should be almost free. It should be as free gets. And with all these really cool Web 5 platforms coming out, I love that he did Web 5. Makes me so happy. It's just so funny. But with all of these Web 5 things coming out, that's how you're going to have to secure information or data, is what I'm saying. Regardless, you're going to need to utilize Bitcoin in some way because it's the only immutable public ledger that everybody can use and all recognize at the same time. Yes, that transaction happened, but what also like, yes, that is this guy's profile picture. You can verify it here, boom. I mean, and it should really only cost 1 Satoshi. It might need to cost less. I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Charlie, I want to ask another question here, and this will kind of be the last piece we'll wrap up so that we're not being too long for the Satoshi Saturday.
I love talking about this though. So yeah.
And maybe we'll have to continue on for an additional piece of the conversation. But last piece for all the people that are here at this point, talk a little bit more on the inscriptions and the actual data that you can put on the blockchain. And also, I want to kind of pair this with also the idea of, you're talking about the roads, right? The roads is the Bitcoin network without the lines, right? That we agree upon as, this is my lane, that's your lane. This is how we're going to navigate. It's almost like you put on a pair of, augmented reality, like sunglasses or something, to where then you can see all of these things that are actually happening under the hood that you can't see without the sunglasses. So my thought is, can things that are in the blockchain impact you if you don't have those glasses on, right? If you're not viewing things through that. What is the data? What is the limit to the data that you can put in there? Can you put videos? I mean, I know we're talking about very small amounts of size as far as data, but can you put videos? You put pictures? Like, what can you actually put in there?
The analogy you use, Nick, I don't know if you borrowed this from something Casey said, but like, it is kind of like putting on kaleidoscope glasses or something. that is like a common analogy he makes. I don't really know if we know. I don't know if I know enough yet to really like imagine how it might change how the Bitcoin network fundamentally works. Like if this really takes off and does like this kind of marks the beginning of like a very dominant trend of this type of interpretation of Bitcoin. I don't see how it can't. I see it. It has to affect Bitcoin somehow. Does it? I think if the average user in an emerging third world nation can't subvert their government by using Bitcoin, then I think this is probably a bad thing for Bitcoin. As it is, I have a hard time seeing how this actually really affects that too much. And I actually think this probably, I think it actually is probably ultimately good because they can use Bitcoin for a lot more interesting things now. So it is like putting on new lenses. It's so early, like that I struggle to like really land on like where I think the trajectory lies here. And that's why I'm so fascinated by it. Because I love the Bitcoin is hard money, self-sovereignty argument, and I've said I love this, I endorse it, but like I'm Bitcoin, the world of like the Bitcoin narrative is kind of like a corpus where some are like the white blood cells, like keeping some of the purity of and health of the body, whereas others are kind of like the heart and the eyes, and they look up and they see around, and those may be attack vectors, but those are also the way the body navigates and grows and builds itself. And this is one of those things where it's like something totally new, which we've never seen before, and that's what fascinates me. And my heuristic for like, is this good or is this bad? Is this bringing more people into a pro Bitcoin and we're going to use Bitcoin stance? And let me tell you this: I've spent the past decade proselytizing for Bitcoin. I spent the past decade tirelessly out of my own pocket trying to get everybody and everybody to buy more Bitcoin, use Bitcoin, download a full node. And in the past month, I have helped more people not just download and run full nodes, but also dig into a lot of the obscure stuff under the hood that even myself didn't quite understand. I have helped more people in the past month do that by a factor of 10 than in my past decade of trying to get people to do this combined. It is like night and day. And I like to say this: we can loathe the frivolity of the NFT JPEG crowd as much as you want, but and we can say, oh, they're using it wrong. But these people are figuring out how to download Bitcoin Core, run Bitcoin D, and run it all from command line. And God help anybody who stands between an NFT person and their JPEG. They will figure out how to do whatever, and they will move mountains, and they will figure out how to run Bitcoin Core. What is crazy is these people are already saying things, in just like a matter of a month, going from Bitcoin doesn't do anything, it's dumb, Ethereum's the future, to I'm inscribing things immortally onto the Bitcoin time chain. This is our dream. We have like hoped people would like call Bitcoin this immortal, immutable network for so long, and now they come flocking and they're onboarded natively to like the details and obscurities of like how Bitcoin works under the hood. I think ultimately that's good. This will open up new Pandora's boxes of like things that we're gonna have to work on and things that we're gonna have to like dial back. But like this takes Bitcoin's user base and doubles it. This takes the node count and triples it. This takes the general knowledge in the Bitcoin like space and disseminates it on a much deeper, broader level. So I'll be a part of the vanguard helping push that forwards. And I trust, because Bitcoin is this network which like just survives and it just evolves and mutates into this like resilient, unattackable kind of like organism, it will survive. Do you believe everything's good for Bitcoin? Because if you do, and you've said that mantra for the past several years, this has to be good for Bitcoin. We can now talk about witness data discounts, the pricing and incentive mechanisms. Those are good conversations to have. I think if we're arguing over whether a JPEG is worthwhile to inscribe to Bitcoin, take it up with Mises, because value is kind of what the market pays for it. The market determines those are valuable.
My thing about this whole inscription situation in the NFTs of the world, I don't know anything about the people. I care, like you're saying, I care less, to be honest with you. Like, we're gonna have to onboard people who are boomers. You know what I mean? Like, the JPEG people should be easy, all things considered. The only thing that we need to get them to understand is like, there's no second best. So if you're going to build something, we'd appreciate it if you bring it to Lightning. Which brings me to my next question. Ordinals on the layer 1 versus ordinals potentially on a layer 2. What stops somebody from building and I've thought about this. What stops somebody from building a proof of stake sidechain on top of Lightning and making an NFT marketplace there? Because wasn't MetaMask and kind of fraudulent? Like, they didn't really
possibly. Right now we're dealing. I'm glad we're not talking about this on the podcast, but like right now, so the Bitcoin Stacks layer, which is kind of this thing which happened on the side. I thought Bitcoin Stacks was interesting, didn't really care a whole lot about it. These people are building a lot of shit on Bitcoin, but it's not fucking Bitcoin, and they're trying to sell it as such. It is hard for me to like navigate this because they're pro Bitcoin, but it really feels like like a shilling affinity scam. And and that's really hard for me because I'm trying to maintain neutrality here. But when you talk about, I'll say this. I just generally don't think scaling a blockchain with a faster blockchain is the right idea. This idea of maintaining chain state, that is, a blockchain needs to make sure everything on the blockchain is tracked. The way to scale something is not to have a distributed trustless thing which just tracks things faster and keeps the chain state. This is not like how scaling works. This is why Lightning's so cool, because it's not another blockchain. It's something totally different. It's why I think Cash App is actually, I call Cash App a layer 2, because it's its own ecosystem. And I also think layer 2 is a bit like it's a really good way to like talk about scaling, but it's also like kind of myopic, because I would rather, instead of thinking of Bitcoin as like a flat plane and things like scaling on top of it, think of it like a sphere where things just emerge out of it, and these are like expressions which reference it. That's kind of the way I think we should think about Bitcoin scaling. It's just Bitcoin abstraction. So
Bitcoin is far too big to put it in any one. It doesn't even matter. Like, this is the hot topic now, but at the same time, there's good enough speculation that Russia is literally over here taking oil in for Bitcoin, and they're having people mine it. They're developing the infrastructure of it. So it's like, at the same time, it doesn't stop Bitcoin from all these. That's why Bitcoin being an open source protocol, I think, is super cool. The thing about Lightning that scares me, I guess, a little bit is it doesn't matter what country you look at. Look at the United States, quote unquote, the freest country ever. The Constitution was written in 1781 and 1791, there was a national bank. So it took them, not even a decade for them to instill a central bank, which, in my opinion, is the problem. I mean, it literally is the problem. If you look at history, the problem is banks. The problem is banks, and when banks mess up, then we all feel the wrath of, inflation, poor investment, all that kind of stuff. The Lightning and banking, I feel like I see that happening, and I feel like these NFT guys are going to be the ones that do it, because they're going to want to sell these ordinals or NFTs or whatever for these astronomical prices. And I think they can get it. I just don't think they can get it in real Bitcoin. I think they can get it in fake Bitcoin for sure.
My hot take is I think the JPEGs are going to have they're going to emerge to have their own little like kind of like they're gonna have a little bit of value long term. It's gonna be kind of like maybe like the fashion industry. Like it's a major industry, but it's not like if the fashion industry like just disappeared tomorrow, nobody would care.
Right.
But it's like considerable economic value. It's core to society. We all love it. But like it doesn't. Nobody doesn't eat because of fashion. So that's the thing when I think about like JPEGs. But I actually think I didn't even answer like, yeah, you can describe anything. You can describe videos. You can describe programs, whatever. You can describe video games on chain. People have been doing this, but like, you
can put video games on chain.
Yeah, somebody put Doom on chain.
What do you mean whenever you say put it on chain? I mean, obviously, surely the whole game.
I know,
not...
right? No, the whole file. It's like you literally took the .exe executable file or whatever the Mac equivalent is, and you just like literally upload that file. So the data, the literal code is on the chain. When you go to ordinals.com in the Explorer, that is really just a front end which says, oh, this data is a JPEG. This data is an executable video game. We're going to just like display that in its form. We're going to run that. And that's what's actually happening. So it's not like so like you can put anything. And so we have this issue because we fucking manually censor this shit. And we have taken some horrendous stuff off the front end. We just choose what to display and what not. And because
there is bad stuff that's been hashed into or inscribed into the chain, correct?
Yeah, and there will be.
We've seen that on Twitter.
Yeah. I think that's a pretty good criticism to say that this is bad, but this is like literally the whole use case of Bitcoin is that you can't stop it. And
anybody can do
hate
anything.
Being the guy who's like on the side of neutrality because I objectively call these things evil. Bitcoin's job is not to determine good and evil. Its job is to be neutral consensus. What our job is to determine and fight for what's good and evil. Bitcoin is neutral and doesn't care. And a lot of people say Bitcoin doesn't care like as a defense mechanism. It also doesn't care what like good is. And that's one of the challenges. It's like fire. Fire burns things which combust. It doesn't burn things which are good or bad. And so that's like what the whole point of Bitcoin is. It's bigger than me. It's bigger than my moral rubric. And it's so frustrating. It's so frustrating to admit that. I'm waxing eloquent, but like it's not an easy thing to love Bitcoin. You can say it's good, but I think neutrality is what the world needs. Neutral consensus. And so it's not really fun to be a Bitcoiner and be honest. It's like so hard to admit that like I try to think that some of the shit is evil, but like Bitcoin doesn't care that I think it's evil. So
well, it's weird, Charlie. I think you're bringing up a really interesting point, and that's because your ego's involved at that point when you start thinking about good and bad, right? Yeah. And also good and bad is subjective, right? Which it makes it even more complex and difficult.
Yeah.
But also we're not, in this case, we're kind of having this conversation about the medium, right, and not the morality. The medium, So it's like you talk about language, like. Language is not good or bad. It is just a way that we communicate individual to individual, like what our human experience is. And so you can't say that like you want to say that medium can only be allowed for good things to happen.
Yeah, don't swear. Don't take the Lord's name in vain. You can still do it. Language exists.
Exactly, right? So it's like you want to say that this medium can only be used for good, but then you run into the question, okay, well, what is good? Like you can't, there's no way to, it's very difficult, I'll say, to objectively agree on what is good and bad because you've got so many different people in so many different cultures in so many different parts of the world. There's just, it's so difficult. So that's where, Charlie, what you're saying is so true, that the medium has to be a neutral and equal, like markets have to find equilibrium, right? If that is that there is more bad happening on this network than good by somebody's means, Well, that's just what the market is. So maybe you just want to opt out of that market, and then I guess more macro, all of those markets, those individual markets, all create the global sentiment, right?
How many transactions would it take to fill up a block? Like, how many more users do you think before like a Ordinal would have to compete with just like a daily transaction?
So right now they are competing. It is wild. I'm watching the mempool all day. Fees are gone up. Good luck if you send a transaction with 1 sat per VByte, which is something typically Bitcoiners don't think about. Your transaction fees and manually controlling those. Like I sent some transactions 3 weeks ago, which are still hanging out in the mempool. I got one last night. I was like, oh shit, nice. But like, yeah, it's wild. Yeah.
Can you explain the mempool a little bit for me? Because I'm not.
And this is like another thing. Is like these are like what the mempool is like. It's crazy because like you can understand Bitcoin from like a fundamentals of money standpoint, but this is like, yeah, this is why I say like Bitcoin. You think it's this mountain. You think you crest the hill and you finally wrap your head, or you've read all of Mises. You're an Austrian economist and you're like, I know what Bitcoin is. I've got it. But you don't. And so there's so many things which I've looked at for so long and I understand them differently now. It's like, to borrow some religious language, like reading scripture. You've looked at this and you view it differently, decade to decade. So the mempool. This gets into how Bitcoin actually works under the hood. You have a wallet. You broadcast an unspent transaction output of 1 Bitcoin, and you're really just trying to send 0.1 Bitcoin. So eventually you'll get 0.9 Bitcoin back. This is a very simple reductionist way. That transaction gets sent out and broadcast to all the other nodes, which have in their pool of memory, or mem pool, they hold that transaction and the fee in this kind of like, if you see that red chart right there,
the pink one,
yeah.
Griff, can you zoom in on that?
Which one? This down here?
The pink one, yeah. You see there's actually like different colors on top of it.
Yep.
When that gets really full, you'll see multiple stratas, different colors, like kind of like a cross section of the earth emerge, and those represent different strata or tiers of fee rates. So right now, all the pink is like the lowest fee rate of like 1 or 2 sats per byte is how fees are priced. But like last week, you had like 4 different colors of like blue, red, green, and they all represented different fee tiers. And so the memory or the mempool of each node sees all these transactions and holds them there. And then the way miners actually include transactions in the block, technically the pools do this. They basically look at the mempool and they select which transactions from that mempool to include in the block. And so theoretically, miners will always choose the most profitable ones. And right now, the miners keep shaving off the top most profitable transactions in the mempool. And so the miners, the pools actually have their own nodes, which have their own mempools. Each mempool for a node probably looks a little bit different because it may not seal the transactions, but in aggregate, all the transactions are seen, and everybody's incentivized to see as much of the transactions broadcast as possible. So like the pools themselves see the transactions, hold that in their node's mempool, and then when they find a hash, they pull from that mempool and select those transactions and build the block, and then append that block to the Bitcoin blockchain. This is like so crazy because like it's a mechanic which not many people have looked at before, myself included. I could explain this, and I could answer yes and no questions about how this process worked, but it's like in the past 2 or 3 months I've had to like literally watch it. Okay, that transaction was selected, that transaction wasn't. I'm looking and kind of gamifying my own fees based upon even time of day. So like we even see like a cyclicality to the mempool happen where it kind of clears out, in the wee hours of North American morning. And it's so fascinating because long term, the mempool will probably always be full, so that the fee market so that strata, that pink layer, is probably going to be smaller, and you're going to have a huge dynamic capital markets for bidding for block space. And like let's say you send a transaction which has a certain amount, and you're not urgent for that transaction to be included in a block anytime soon. You may not have to worry about it. But let's say you do that, and then a couple days pass, and then you're like, oh shit, something has changed. I need that transaction to process. It's still stuck with that fee. And the mempool gets really clogged, and maybe we are really full, and maybe it's not going to get transacted so fast. There's mechanics like replace by fee or RBF, where you actually broadcast and you kind of Indiana Jones swap it out like that idle. Or let's say you then go directly to a pool and you say, hey, pool, Foundry pool, Luxor pool, Slush pool, Brains pool, I need you guys to include the next blocks you get in the next couple days. I need you to include this one transaction that's sitting in the mempool, which probably wouldn't be paid for. I'm going to actually just pay you cash on the side, or I'm going to hand you Bitcoin directly. This is maybe not even a transaction which occurs on the Bitcoin blockchain. It's called an out-of-band payment. This adds incredible dynamism to the world of block building, and ultimately, because this is this has abstractions of monetary implications of how blocks are built. This is so fascinating to me. These are things which were existed on the inside conversations in Bitcoin for so long as theoretically, we have the wording and the concepts for these already laid out. We've just not seen it in practice. That one, if you saw, there was a 4 megabyte block, which was really famous, which included one single transaction, which was a giant fucking NFT of a wizard. It was really fun. I'm actually currently getting chats with the guys who did that. What that was an out of band payment where it was the first time that really been done at scale, where it's they said, okay, we're gonna broadcast a transaction which is kind of close to the theoretical block limit, and I'm gonna pay you, the pool. I'm gonna hand you a whole Bitcoin to include this in a block sometime today, and they did that. That's how that deal was done. And so it adds a really interesting mechanic to the fee market, because technically we think the fees have to happen on chain, but really in aggregate, the fees just have to be somehow referencing Bitcoin. It's still that fee, we can really say, is still technically part of the chain, but it's so fascinating. And this is the inevitability of having Bitcoin become a more dynamic network. Nothing changed. No code was pushed to the Bitcoin core. Nothing changed. This is taking this is what we've always said. Bitcoin has this. We've ossified the code base. We've set it so it doesn't change, and so that this kind of stuff can happen. It's hard to predict how it will happen, and when it does, it's that gets me excited. So.
Such a good point to end this, Charlie. What a great conversation. I really appreciate you coming on with us again. I know you're a busy guy, very sought after, this guy right now. Charlie, thank you for joining us, man. Come find us on Twitter at Nyc and Griff Show. Also find Charlie at CB Spears on Twitter. And if you're not watching video right now, we are on Spotify and on YouTube with video. Charlie, would you say that Twitter is the best place to find you, get in touch with you?
Yes, I've reached inbox escape velocity, so I will try to respond to DMs. But that's the best place to reach me. And find me on Discord. That's kind of where I spend all my time these days.
Beautiful. Thank you for coming on again, Charlie, and we'll see you next time.
Rock on.